Have you ever noticed that you keep falling for the same type of person? Maybe the dynamic is slightly different each time. Maybe the face is different, but something about the energy, the pattern, the feeling it creates in you, it's familiar, maybe uncomfortably familiar. There's a reason for that, and it goes deeper than taste. Today, we're decoding the psychology of attraction, why you want who you want, and what that tells you about yourself. What if the person you're most attracted to right now, the one you think about, the one who makes everything feel more alive, what if that attraction has almost nothing to do with who they actually are? What if it has everything to do with something that happened to you long before you ever met them? That's not a comfortable idea. Most of us prefer to believe that attraction is a response, that we meet someone, we experience who they are, and something in us rises to meet them. That we are, at least in this, free. But the research tells a different story. And the more honest that story becomes, the more useful it is, not because it removes the magic from love, but because it gives you something far more valuable than magic. It gives you understanding, and understanding is the beginning of choice. Today we are going deep into the psychology and neuroscience of attraction, why you want who you want, what drives the pull you feel towards certain people, and what knowing all of this might change about how you move through love. Let's get into it. Before we begin, please subscribe to ensure that you never miss out on any of my videos. Let's start with the most fundamental thing. Attraction is not a decision. This is something most people already sense, but it is worth saying clearly. You do not choose who you are attracted to. You can choose who you pursue, you can choose who you invest in, you can choose with time and intention to move toward people who are good for you and away from people who are not. But the initial pull, the spark, the draw, the feeling that this particular person is interesting in a way others are not, that is not chosen. It arises, and it arises from a set of processes that began long before the moment you experienced them. Understanding those processes does not make attraction less real. The feeling is still real. The connection, when it grows into something, is still real. But understanding where the feeling comes from gives you the ability to ask a question that most people never think to ask. Is this attraction pointing me towards something good, or is it pointing me towards something familiar? Those two things are not always the same. And the inability to tell them apart is at the root of more heartbreak than almost anything else in human relations. The first major driver of attraction is familiarity, and this one is supported by decades of research in social psychology. In the 1960s, a psychologist named Robert Zajonc conducted a series of experiments now known as the mere exposure effect. The basic finding was this. The more we are exposed to something, the more we tend to like it. This applies to music, to images, to words, and it applies to people. Simply being around someone more frequently increases how attractive we tend to find them. Not because anything about them has changed, but because familiarity itself creates positive feeling. This is why proximity has always been one of the strongest predictors of romantic connection. The people we end up with are, far more often than romantic mythology would like to admit, the people who happened to be nearby. The colleague, the person in the same class, the friend of a friend we kept running into. Not destiny, geography, repetition, familiarity breeding not contempt, but attachment. Now this has a beautiful side to it. It means that love is often built rather than found, that the person you will feel most deeply connected to may not be the one who dazzled you immediately, but the one whose presence accumulated quietly until one day you realized you could not imagine them not being there. But it also has a more challenging implication. Because the familiarity principle does not only apply to the people in our current lives, it applies to the emotional patterns from our past ones. And this is where the psychology of attraction gets considerably more complex. The second major driver of attraction and arguably the most powerful one, is what psychologists call the attachment blueprint. Attachment theory, originally developed by John Bowlby in the mid-20th century and expanded by decades of subsequent research, begins with a simple observation. The way we learn to relate to other people starts in infancy. The relationship between a child and their primary caregivers, how available those caregivers are, how responsive, how consistent, how safe, creates a template, a set of expectations and emotional reflexes about what relationships feel like, what they require, and what we need to do within them to get our needs met. This template, which researchers call the attachment style, follows us into adulthood, and it shapes, in ways that are often invisible to us, who we find attractive and what we find attractive about them. There are broadly 3 attachment orientations in adults. Secure attachment, which develops when early caregiving was consistent and emotionally available, tends to produce adults who are comfortable with intimacy, who do not fear abandonment or engulfment, who can move toward connection without excessive anxiety or the need for distance. Research consistently shows that securely attached people have more satisfying, more stable long-term relationships. They are, in the language of attachment science, an easy case. Anxious attachment, which typically develops when early caregiving was inconsistent, sometimes warm, sometimes unavailable, unpredictable in a way the child could not adapt to, tends to produce adults who are hypersensitive to signs of rejection or withdrawal, who monitor their partner's emotional state closely, who need more reassurance than most people are comfortable providing, and who critically tend to find avoidant partners intensely attractive because the emotional unavailability of an avoidant person replicates the familiar feeling of reaching for someone who is not always there.
Avoidant attachment, which develops when caregiving was emotionally distant or when expressing need was met with withdrawal, tends to produce adults who are deeply uncomfortable with emotional dependency, who value independence to the point of pushing closeness away, who tend to feel most attracted to anxious partners because the anxious partner's pursuit temporarily satisfies a need for connection without requiring the avoidant person to initiate vulnerability themselves. The anxious-avoidant pairing is one of the most common relationship dynamics in existence, and it is also one of the most reliably painful. Each person activates the other's deepest wound. The anxious person's need for closeness triggers the avoidant person's instinct to retreat. The avoidant person's retreat triggers the anxious person's fear of abandonment. And both people end up trapped in a dynamic that feels like passion, but functions like trauma repetition. They often describe the chemistry between them as unlike anything they have ever felt. And they are right. It is unlike anything they have ever felt with a securely attached person. But that difference is not evidence that this connection is deeper. It is evidence that it is activating something older. This brings us to what I think is the most important concept in this entire video, the difference between what is familiar and what is healthy. For many people, not all, but many, the emotional environment of early childhood was not entirely safe, not necessarily in a dramatic or obvious way. Caregivers were human. They were inconsistent sometimes, emotionally absent sometimes, critical sometimes, unpredictable sometimes, and the child's nervous system adapted to that environment. It learned what to expect. It learned what love feels like in practice, not in theory. And then that person grows up, and they start dating, and they encounter 2 kinds of people. The first kind produces a feeling of ease, of warmth, of comfortable presence, of being genuinely seen and not needing to perform or worry or manage. And that feeling, the feeling of safety, often reads as boring, as not enough, as the absence of chemistry. The second kind produces a feeling of electricity, of intensity, of never quite being settled, never quite being secure, always slightly in pursuit of something that keeps moving just out of reach. And that feeling, the feeling of anxiety, reads as passion, as depth, as the real thing. This is the attachment blueprint in operation. The nervous system is not looking for what is good, it is looking for what is known. And if what is known is inconsistency and uncertainty, then consistency will feel flat and uncertainty will feel like home. I want to say this as clearly as I can. If the people who are straightforwardly kind and available consistently feel boring to you, that is not information about them. That is information about your nervous system. It is telling you what it learned to expect from love. And that learning, however deeply embedded, is not permanent. It can be updated, but only if you are first willing to see it for what it is. There are other factors that shape attraction, and I want to give them their due before we close. Similarity is one of the most robust predictors of attraction in the research literature.
We tend to be drawn to people who share our values, our sense of humor, our worldview, our level of education and ambition. Not because opposites don't attract, they sometimes do initially, but because sustained connection is built on the experience of being understood. And we are most easily understood by people who already share something of our frame of reference. Reciprocity is another powerful driver. Knowing that someone likes us increases our attraction to them significantly. This is sometimes dismissed as vanity, but it is actually something more interesting than that. Being liked by someone we respect is evidence that we are, in their eyes, worth liking. And that evidence feeds our sense of self-worth in a way that makes the person providing it more attractive by association. We want to be around people who make us feel good about ourselves. That is not shallow, that is human. Physical attraction, while real and significant, is also more malleable than popular culture suggests. Research consistently shows that our physical assessment of someone changes as we get to know them. People we found average-looking become more attractive as we develop emotional connection with them. People we found physically striking become less attractive as we experience them as unkind or hollow. The body is not separate from the heart in this. They update each other constantly. So what do you do with all of this? How do you actually use this understanding in the practical daily reality of your love life? The first thing is to start paying attention to the feeling that attraction produces in you, rather than just the fact of it. When you are drawn to someone, ask yourself, what does this feel like in my body? Does it feel like warmth and ease, or does it feel like urgency and anxiety? Does being around this person make you feel more like yourself, or does it make you feel like you are reaching for something that isn't quite secure? Is the excitement you feel about them genuinely joyful, or is it laced with a low hum of fear that they might disappear? These distinctions matter enormously, because attraction that is rooted in anxiety, that electric, breathless, obsessive feeling, tends to produce relationships that are exhausting, destabilizing, and ultimately painful, no matter how intensely felt. And attraction that is rooted in genuine connection, the quieter, warmer, more grounded kind, tends to produce relationships that actually last and actually nourish. The second thing is to give unfamiliar feelings time. If you have spent your life being drawn to emotionally unavailable people, a securely attached person will feel strange at first, not bad, just different. The absence of anxiety will feel like the absence of chemistry. The consistency will feel like predictability. The openness will almost feel too easy. This is your nervous system encountering something it has not been trained to recognize as love. And the answer is not to dismiss it. The answer is to stay long enough to find out what it actually is. The third thing, and perhaps the hardest, is to become curious about your patterns rather than ashamed of them.
If you keep choosing the same type of person, that is not evidence of stupidity or weakness. It is evidence that your nervous system is doing exactly what nervous systems do, seeking the familiar. The question is not, why are you like this? The question is, what were you taught to expect from love, and is that expectation still serving you? That question, asked honestly, with compassion rather than judgment, is the beginning of genuine change. Not the immediate, dramatic kind, the slow, deep kind, the kind that actually lasts. Attraction is not random. It is not fate. It is not destiny selecting the right person for you from across a crowded room. It is your nervous system, shaped by everything that came before, recognizing something it already knows and moving toward it. Sometimes what it knows is beautiful. Sometimes what it knows is a wound looking for repetition. And often, for most of us, it is some complicated mixture of both. The goal is not to stop feeling attracted to people.
The goal is to understand the attraction well enough to ask whether it is leading you somewhere you actually want to go. To learn the difference between the pull of genuine connection and the pull of familiar pain. To become, slowly and with patience, someone who can feel the electricity and also ask, what is this electricity actually made of? Because that question, not the suppression of feeling, but the understanding of it, is where real choice begins. And real choice in love is one of the most powerful things a person can have. That's Love Decoded. Drop a comment below. Do you think you have a type? And after watching this, do you see that type differently? I read every single comment, and I genuinely want to know what this brought up for you. If this video gave you something to think about, subscribe. We release a new video every week that goes this deep into the psychology of love, attraction, and what it actually means to connect with another person. Share this with someone who is trying to understand their own patterns. And I will see you in the next one.